I know now what it's kind of invoking is, driving down the French Riviera in an open top car with all the life and vivacity going on around you, and it perfectly evokes that.
Hi, and welcome to Creative Crush, an opportunity for CMOs to step from behind the brand and talk about the creative work that they keep coming back to. Today, we're talking about an absolute classic album, one from my youth that I keep going back to again and again. So I'm so pleased today's guest chose it. Glyn, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what your creative crush is?
Yeah, hi, I'm Glyn Britton. I'm currently CMO at SQE, which is a modern energy supplier for very large industrial and commercial businesses. And my creative crush is the album Parade by Prince.
I hate rock and roll. All right. Enough of that tame shit. Who wants some head?
But we're going to obviously dive very, very, very deep into this album over the next 30 minutes. But before we do, can you just give me in one sentence or two why this is your creative crush?
I mean, I think I first heard it in 1989, about 3 years after it came out, when I was, what would I have been, 16 years old. And it just grabbed me in a way that nothing ever had until that point. Um, but quite unusually, you know, 40 years on, it still grabs me in the same way today, whereas other stuff from the era has waned. But this, I just find it just as refreshing and invigorating every time I listen to it. And I must have listened to it thousands of times over that last 40 years, and it never loses its magic for me.
Can you take me back to that moment in 1989 when you first heard it? First of all, who introduced you to it? How did you stumble across it?
So I was growing up in a village called Finningley, which is about 7 miles outside Doncaster, and life was very grey and standard. And what it's hard for younger people, my daughters, to realise how hard it was to just kind of come across stuff then outside of the kind of everyday. So I knew about chart pop, and I knew about Doncaster indie rock, bands like Cud and The Wedding Present. Um, and that was my life. And then a friend of mine, Melissa, gave me the cassette of Parade. She'd borrowed it from her older brother, who was a very sophisticated guy, and she said, "You've got to listen to this." And within the first 23 seconds of the first track, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It opened my mind to the fact there was a whole world out there. I didn't know what I was hearing. I still don't actually really. It's got so many bits and bobs in it that add up to something entirely different. Um, I can make a bit more sense of it these days, but back then when I was 16, I had no idea what I was listening to, but it just hit me hard immediately.
You made reference to the opening, the very first track, and it is kind of quite a wild opening. Really, it's quite hard to pin down what it is.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on there? It's just 23 seconds of bang, 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 but it's got this amazing discordant orchestration in there. It's got a bit of steel drum in there, uh, and it just it sounds like a carnival. I know now what it's kind of invoking is, driving down the French Riviera in an open top car with all the life and vivacity going on around you, and it perfectly evokes that. At the time, I didn't know what the French Riviera was or what it looked like or what it felt like, but again, the track just brings it to life so viscerally. And I just thought, what on earth is going on here? But I wanted to know I wanted to know more about what was going on here.
Yeah, so there's something about that discord of that. If I remember, we'll pick back up on it in a bit. But the, I was talking to Chris, our producer, yesterday, the day before, about we were both different ages when we both discovered Prince, but there was something about him crossing over so many genres that made him really appealing to people who like guitar music, because he was one part Jimi Hendrix, one part Rick James, one part James Brown, one part. He was all these incredible artists. And there's just something about that tapestry of music that made him really appealing to everyone. I was a DJ at the time. I was playing like Coloured Wedding Present, Smiths, but I didn't have a problem dropping Prince in on any night whatsoever. So
Well,
yeah,
no,
there's some.
exactly, and some of his earlier stuff was quite new wave influenced as well. Kind of, he's probably set the template for a couple of eras in the '80s because his early stuff on Dirty Mind and Controversy was really sparse, synth driven. He's pioneer of the Lindrum drum machine, so that set a template, and then going through 1999 into Purple Rain, he's kind of taking on mainstream America with a more rock sound. But as you say, he's channeling Jimi Hendrix, bit of Springsteen in there, and that's what made him an absolute megastar. But then what he does is throw that away on purpose. He destroys that because he's bored of it. He does Around the World in a Day, which is basically a psychedelic album. But then Parade for me is where he puts so many new bits into his palette. It's quite funky. It's got soul elements. It's got this kind of French jazz chanson type vibe in there. It's got this kind of discordant orchestral Debussy type stuff going on in there. I mean, just amazing. This is a 27-year-old kid still from Minneapolis. How does he even do this? Where does he get all this stuff from? It's just mind blowing.
Do you have a favorite track on the album, by the way?
Yeah, Mountains.
Okay.
My this is my one of my most treasured possessions is my 10-inch picture disc of Mountains, the extended version, backed with Alexa to Paris extended version, which is my favorite Prince B-side.
What is it about Mountains that you love so much? Why that track?
I don't know. Honestly, it's big, it's celebratory, it's idealistic, it's a little bit silly. It's got some kind of cod mystic lyrics going on. Rationally, it doesn't bear a lot of scrutiny, but emotionally, it just lifts me every time. It's absolutely amazing.
I love Mountains. I love Another Love, A Hole in the Head as well. I think the reason why that always stands out is there's just something about the title, first of all, and the way he sings it. I remember it catching my attention, his wordplay and all that. It's just, I think it's good. And obviously for anyone who's not familiar with the album, the biggest track on the album, or the biggest hit of the album, was Kiss.
Yeah, Kiss, which still fills wedding dance floors today. Every time it's a surefire dance floor filler. I like Kiss, but for me, it doesn't quite fit on Parade. It's kind of the era, but it's doing a different job. It's really stripped back, minimal. It's quite hard in a way. It's quite cynical. It hasn't got the dreaminess of lots of the other tracks on Parade.
Basically, Kiss was a demo that Prince made. He only did one verse, did the very first verse, and it was just on an acoustic guitar, and he played it, and he wasn't feeling it. So he gave it to another band who was on his Paisley Park label at the time, said, I'm not feeling this, but maybe you can do something with it. So he gave it to them, and they did a full version of it, and then we had to listen to it, and he was like, I think I'm going to take this back. So he took it back, and he pretty much kept it. The only thing he did was remove their bass line. He took their bass line, but everything was there. Everything that they created was pretty much in the version that got released. All the harmonies, the guitar solo, all the stops, which are kind of quite fundamental. So effectively, they kind of produced that track and wrote a big chunk of that track. But it's interesting that he took the bass away, because there's no bass in When Doves Cry as well, which is a really unusual thing to do, to remove the bass. So it's got a starkness, which, as you say, kind of feels out of place with the lushness and the fullness of some of the other tracks on that album.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing he did add when he took the track back from Maserati, that was the other band, was the falsetto. Their version has the singing in the normal register. And you could argue that's their little spark of genius that again takes it to another level. But it's a really interesting kind of collaboration, slightly autocratic one. I'm going to give him a track, and then I'm going to take it back when I realise how good it is. But
Well, from what I understand, he wasn't an easy person to work with sometimes.
no, I don't think he was.
Yeah, because right, was kind of for there's quite a few reasons why he wasn't an easy person to work with. First of all, because he had his vision, and obviously, he wanted things to be done his way. So that made it really difficult. He had a strange relationship because he had a band and wasn't his band in a strange way. They kind of felt like session musicians a lot of the time. So that must have been quite difficult to deal with. And also, I don't think he was probably a great communicator with the band. I saw an interview with the Revolution where they were literally on stage and Prince introduced some other band members to come on stage and they were like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And this was just before we actually broke the Revolution up.
Yeah, this is at the end of the Parade tour when he was doing that, and Wendy and Lisa looked at each other and said, we are fucked." That's how we gave them their P45. Also, he was like incredibly hard worker, never slept. They would. On a show day, there'd be, they were punishing 3-hour show and then go and do an after party at a club starting at 1 in the morning till 3 in the morning. Then he would go back to the hotel and listen to tapes of that night show so he could bollock the band members the next day about what they did wrong. And then he'd spend when they're in bed in the morning, he's composing his next album or 2 or 3 albums worth of material. I mean, the guy just never slept, worked constantly, and it was really hard for people to keep pace with that. His kind of main producer, engineer, Susan Rogers, he just wore her out. He had to have producers on rotation, backup ones he could call, because if she was just exhausted, he'd need somebody else so he could keep going, keep recording.
Yeah, he doesn't do he didn't do many interviews, but there's some really great interviews with Susan Rogers out there that gives you fantastic insight. If you're obsessed with craft and that sort of things, just dig out some of the Susan Rogers interviews because it's really fascinating. And just on that work ethic that you mentioned, for a little bit of context, Around the World in a Day came out at the end of 84, so almost 85, and he had a relative gap of about 13, 14 months before Parade came out, and then so that was 86, and then 87, double album, Sign of the Times, 88, Love Sex 89, Batman, Diamonds and Pearls year after. So every year he was kind of pushing out album after album after album, hit after hit after hit. So incredibly prolific run.
Yeah, but also in the Parade era, not only is he working on Parade, he's finishing the Jill Jones album, he's producing the Maserati album, the Family album, he's making the film Under the Cherry Moon, and actually what became Sign of the Times was originally meant to be a triple album, not a double album, called Crystal Ball. So he's generating tracks for that as well. Just incredibly prolific. There's a Roadhouse Garden album as well that was meant to be the Revolution album that got started in that era as well. So in that 18-month gap, he's making 7 albums basically, although only some of that sees the light of day.
So just going back to Under the Cherry Moon, Parade is it's the soundtrack to Under the Cherry Moon. Were you a fan of the film?
No, it's a stinker. I watch it every time I'm home ill. If I'm really feverish, I watch Under the Cherry Moon, and it's basically the only condition in which I can watch it. That makes any kind of sense. It's from a plot and a character point of view, it's pretty awful, but it's got a vibe.
It's got a vibe. Interestingly, after Prince died, there was lots of revisiting it and suggesting that it was actually a cult classic and it was much better than it got credit for. So I watched it again, and it's terrible. It's a real thinker. I tried to, I hoped there was something there that was going to be discovered, but unfortunately, I couldn't. So
no, I'm afraid not. It's a pity, really, that Parade is the soundtrack album to Under the Cherry Moon, because if you try to relate it too hard to the plot of the film, it somehow diminishes the the tracks. I prefer to decouple them and appraise it as its own work of art.
Has your love of it changed depending on the context in which you've been listening to? Obviously, you discover an album at that age, which is such an incredibly important age to discover music. I don't think music can ever feel quite as important as it does then. But has your love of it changed in any way through the different eras that you've gone through, maybe from listening on vinyl to digital, through, pre his death, post his death? Has it changed in any way at all?
It's interesting. I don't think it has, and that's not true of other albums. So whether I listened to it first on cassette and then vinyl and then CD, I probably had a mini disc copy, then streaming. I think it has the same impact for me, regardless of what format I'm listening to it in. And that's not, as I say, that's not true of everything. I really love Omadorn by Mike Oldfield, but that is entirely different if you're listening to it on vinyl on a big stereo setup than it is on AirPods or something like that. But Parade for me is bigger than any of those format shifts. As I say, the change in context has been me understanding more about the world, and obviously reading a lot about Prince and what he was trying to do with it. So some of the lyrics and some of the musical references now make sense to me, whereas before they just made me feel a bit funny, a bit woozy. And I now understand a little bit more about why, but that hasn't diminished the magic of it for me. I kind of think it's more akin to a novel for me. I think like a great novel relies on the reader to build the world in their head. And Parade is like that for me. I don't think I'm appraising it on the level, objective level of the music. It's come to mean a lot more for me. And from those first few drum beats, I load that world back up into my head every time I'm listening to it, regardless of the format.
Have you ever seen Prince live?
I have. I was lucky enough to do that. I saw the Nude tour in 1990. And then when he did the residency at the O2 was that 2006, I went to 3 of the stadium shows and 1 of the after shows in the Indigo. So that was pretty amazing. I really wish I'd gone to see the Lovesexy tour in 1989. I absolutely love watching that on my bootleg DVD. And then the thing that did change the context of listening to Parade for me is getting bootleg CDs of the Parade tour. Absolutely amazing. I think that was the ultimate Prince tour, and that's saying something, because his tours were just fabulous. But the Parade show was like a review. It's the opposite of a rock band grinding through their tracks. It's a fast-moving theatrical spectacle, like snippets of songs, lots of brass and drum interludes. He throws a bit of How Much Is That Doggy in the Window in the middle of it. He reclaims other tracks from his protege bands, like Mutiny, which is a family track, and A Love Desire, I think, which is a Sheila E. track. And he's got, dancers and 12 band members on stage. I was saying to my daughter last night, if I could travel in time back to one moment, I think it would be one of those Parade shows in Paris. She said, "Isn't that a waste of time? Shouldn't you kind of go back and try to prevent a disaster or something like that?" But my understanding is you're not allowed to mess with history like that when you time travel. But if I could go back and watch Prince's Parade tour just as an observer, that would be for me a fantastic use of that superpower.
That leads me on to, for anyone who maybe isn't a Prince fan or doesn't know a lot of them, just being introduced to Prince, listening to you evangelize about it so brilliantly, talk them into listening to Parade for the first time.
I think that's difficult, actually, because I think I've tried it in the past, and almost as I'm playing it to them, I hear it in a different way. I hear it shorn of all those memories and associations and the world I build in my head when I'm listening to it. And I hear it just objectively for the music. And I think it's probably quite a difficult entry point for somebody new to Prince. I think you maybe have to kind of work up to it, because it's probably just got too much in it to unpack, unless you've kind of been primed with perhaps some of the less rich, less kind of tapestry type stuff in his archive first. Does that make sense?
Kind of does to me, but it's probably not going to make sense to the man down the pub who's desperately doesn't want to listen to Prince, even though you want him to be.
I'm quite happy for them not to listen to
Yeah,
Parade.
exactly.
It's
That's
mine.
mine. Don't know. Don't listen then.
If they want to go and see the awful new Broadway show inspired by Purple Rain or something, then fine. But I think you got to earn Parade.
You've definitely got to earn it. So one final question. We try not to talk too much about the work side of being a CMO here, but if you were forced to, or if a fellow CMO wanted to write one of those LinkedIn posts about, here's what I learned from listening to Parade, this is what it means for me as a CMO, what could you take? What do you think you could take from it that isn't stretching the point to the most ridiculous extent most of those blog posts are?
10 lessons about lead generation from another a hole in your head. Um, I think for me, it's about building a world. Prince didn't like the world he was born into. It wasn't a great environment, difficult parental situation, stuff like that. So he created his own worlds, a succession of them, and you see that in the outside world. And by world, I mean, uh, music, a band, a look. Parade has an incredibly strong look, which the whole band wore. But there's also kind of codes, in jokes. They've built a whole culture around this era, and he did this 4 or 5 times on the bounce. Purple Rain was probably the first of those, and then Around the World in a Day, and then Parade, and Sign the Times. There's a through line between all of those, but also they're all individual eras and fully immersive, I think, for the people who were in it at the time. And obviously, the best brands do something similar. They've got their own visual codes, their own language. If done well, they increasingly create experiences which consumers can be part of. And I think there's a lot to learn from how that 20-year-old kid from Minneapolis intuited to do that brands could learn about making them a lot more real and special than the kind of surface level nod we sometimes get to those kind of concepts.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier as well, a little bit about he kind of built this world. He built this sound rather for those early albums up to, Controversy and then he kind of dispensed with that sound and moved on to another sound. And there's that kind of leaping from one sound to another, which they all still seem to fit seamlessly into whatever world he was creating, but he still managed to experiment within the parameters of those worlds in a way that it's almost like he needed to never rest on his laurels in any way whatsoever. He needed to constantly be pushing himself and pushing the people that he was working with, so that he just didn't get comfortable in any way whatsoever. Chuck D saying that, Prince lost a lot of his black audience because of that, and Chuck D couldn't stand it because it's almost like the black audience wanted Prince to stay the same, but Prince could never stay the same. It just wasn't in his DNA to ever want his music to sound the same.
That's right. And that creative destruction, disbanding the Revolution at the height of their popularity, because he just knew he had to move on to the next thing, could never rest on his laurels, as you say. Absolutely amazing.